By international affairs commentator Doug Herbert. But first, let's cross to Brussels, talk to our correspondent who joins us from there, Dave Keating. Dave, a serious coming together then of European leaders, face to face, and strong statements afterwards. But now they have to come together, don't they, to agree exactly what the plan is?
Yeah, and the next step is going to be this emergency summit that's happening here in Brussels on Thursday. Now, leaving that summit, European Commission President von der Leyen, leaving this London summit, said that she was going to be coming to this Thursday Brussels summit with a plan for additional military spending. It was thought for a bit that she might mean the white paper that was not supposed to be presented until later, that maybe they were moving that up. I've just been told, no, that is not the case. The white paper on defense for the EU is still scheduled to be put out on March 18th, and they're going to have the ideas discussed on Thursday feed into that white paper. That's going to disappoint some who thought, okay, the Commission is really seeing the urgency here. What's interesting is also at the end of that London summit, Keir Starmer said that they were going to meet again very quickly. It might seem that he was talking about the Thursday summit here in Brussels, but I'm told he will not attend that summit. Of course, Brexit means that the UK isn't part of those European Council discussions. However, Starmer had attended for the first time since Brexit, British Prime Minister attending an EU summit last month, and so it was thought maybe he might join for this one. At this point, it seems like he won't, probably for the difficulty that presents him politically in terms of domestic politics. So what can we expect on Thursday? It seems like von der Leyen is going to come in with a real push to extend the flexibility for European budget rules that would allow states to take on deficits in order to invest in defense. There's also going to be a push for flexible or creative use of existing EU funding, for instance, in terms of the European Stability Mechanism that was introduced after the financial crisis, and they want to change that to be able to spend on defense, but that would mean they need to change some EU legislation, which is a bit complicated. So it's right now, it's not really clear, I guess is what I'm saying, how important that summit on Thursday is going to be. It's going to be missing key players like the UK. If we're talking about this new peace initiative that Starmer talked about yesterday, which would be led by the UK and France in developing an alternative peace plan to the US-Russia one with Ukraine, well, Starmer won't be here on Thursday, so they can't talk about that. So it's a little unclear whether Thursday will be kind of the follow-up to this London summit or something more is needed.
Dave, stay with us. I'm going to talk now to our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert, who's with me here on set as well. It sounds like Thursday is a little unclear where they're going with that, Doug. We know what happened yesterday, though. I mean, Emmanuel Macron warning beforehand it's a quarter to midnight in Europe. I mean, did they rise to the occasion, do you think, those European leaders?
Yes and no. Look, everything Dave Keating just said is factually correct. It is a sober, composed analysis. You'd expect nothing less from Dave Keating. The problem is it's unlikely to make a whit of a difference in the end with regard to Ukraine's destiny. And why do I say that? Putting on an editorial cap? Not really. Because explicitly, Trump has made clear that his message to Volodymyr Zelensky is, without saying it in so many words, but almost going there, shut up, Ukraine. Listen to our terms and listen to Vladimir Putin's terms. You don't have the cards. That he did say. What we see here is basically Europe in a posture where it is forced to speak out of two sides of its mouth. What we actually have is Europe right now trying to defend Ukraine from the United States. Obviously, that is not the terminology in the final communiques and the statements that we hear coming out of these leaders' meetings. But you essentially have a situation with which Europe, their collective jaws have dropped and hit the floor. But at the same time, European leaders are still under no illusions that they are still beholden to the U.S. security umbrella, an umbrella which is now tattered, if not completely destroyed. But they have to go through the motions of making it look like they can still keep Donald Trump on side, even if in their heart of hearts they don't really believe it's possible. Sure, some leaders to varying degrees might have been able to feed themselves a narrative, Stuart, that, yeah, we can still get Trump to basically endorse a peace agreement that would include some form of security guarantee. But at the end of the day, the problem is Donald Trump's if he thinks of security guarantees at all, in quotes, has a far different perspective and vision of what that means than what the Europeans think it means, which is why we have this awkward sort of tightrope act right now. On the one hand, talk of forging coalitions of the willing, talk of doing the heavy lifting, ramping up defense spending, coming together as a European continent to help Ukraine so that Europe can also ultimately help itself against a perceived existential threat from Russia. But at the end of the day, even as Keir Starmer is very clear that this can't be done without the backstop of the United States and that alliance, I don't believe he actually believes that Trump is really there. Maybe they think they can somehow negotiate a position, but as far as Donald Trump is concerned, the White House has moved on right now. The White House's attitude and position is essentially let the Europeans fend for themselves, let them do all that heavy lifting. If they talk of security guarantees, they can use whatever language they want. But at the end of the day, the White House knows very much where they stand. At least Donald Trump knows where he stands, and that is getting a peace deal, getting it quickly, looking like he's won, getting that Nobel Prize in hand. That might sound reductionist and overly simplistic, but that is the narrative at the end of the day. And many Europeans know that even if they can't explicitly say it at this point in time.
So, Dave, where do you think the cracks lie here and the splits, if you like? I mean, that big issue, isn't it? Those countries who still believe that reliance on the US is needed and desperately needed, and others say we just can't rely on them anymore.
Yeah, Doug is absolutely right that there's a lot of wishful thinking here. Basically, Europe is divided into three camps on this question. You have the leaders of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, and the UK, Keir Starmer, who are trying to act as a bridge, who are saying that the US can still be part of this solution. Meloni coming out of that summit yesterday saying she wants to call an European-US summit that she would lead as the close ally of Donald Trump. We heard Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk backing that. So you have the three of them. Then you have to their right, you have Viktor Orban of Hungary and Robert Fico of Slovakia, who are basically saying the EU should just stay out of this. Let Trump and Putin come up with a peace deal and force it on Ukraine, and then the EU should just accept it. They've already said that they will block any new measures of assistance to Ukraine if they try to do that on Thursday. Then you have the leaders like France's Emmanuel Macron, Spain's Pedro Sanchez, and the incoming Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, who have expressed skepticism about the U.S., who have been more willing to openly criticize the Trump administration. You have Friedrich Merz saying that Europe needs to become independent of the U.S., and they're urging a more Europe-only solution, or at least not a solution that relies on the participation of the United States. That middle camp with Tusk, Meloni, and Starmer, they are still saying that the U.S. is a reliable ally, as Starmer repeated again in the press conference last night, and they want any solution to be devised with the United States. As Doug was saying, do they really believe that? That's unclear to me, actually. I think they might actually believe it. I mean, hope dies last, and I think that that center camp really does believe that, and they're going to be pushing that. Meloni is going to try to be pushing that at that summit on Thursday, but the rest of the European leaders are growing more and more skeptical that the U.S. can actually be an active partner here, and they're going more, thinking more that Europe needs to come up with its own solution that wouldn't rely on the U.S., even though the military protectorate does not really make that a very viable reality.
Doug, I'll let you reply. I know there's something else you want to say to what Dave said there. Also, give us the Russian reaction as well.
Yeah, well, first I just want to add a military component. Let's get down to the military nitty-gritty. Russia right now produces about 250,000 artillery shells a month, some of it obviously getting from North Korea as well. That's about 3 million shells a year. In battlefield terms, right now the U.S. and Europe combined are able to produce and potentially give to Ukraine maybe just over 1.2 million artillery shells. You see, when we talk about an insufficient capacity, defense production capacity, there is a big gap between what the Russians are able to bring to bear on the battlefield right now and what the Ukrainians are able to bring to bear, even assuming that you have U.S. support there and a U.S. defense industry backing it. So there's that big gap there. Now, we've heard talk at these meetings today, right, over the weekend, that the U.K. is going to give a $2.8 billion loan to help Ukraine purchase military hardware. There's also a talk of $2 billion in what they call special financing, British export financing for air defense missiles. That's all big talk, and it's not, you can't just brush it aside. It is something. Even France and Ukraine talking about a joint weapons center, some sort of joint weapons production center. Yes, that will obviously help Ukraine on the battlefield. But I'm just trying to say, stacked up against what we've been saying all along, Russia's ability to outman and outgun Ukraine on the ground, it does make a difference on the battlefield. So even with that full-throttled support, assuming, which isn't there right now, of Europe and the United States, Ukraine still isn't up to battlefield snuff when it comes to, going up against the Russians.
Doug, thanks very much. Doug Herbert, our international affairs commentator, and Dave Keating, our correspondent, joining us there from Brussels as well.